Kraven the Hunter is probably the biggest Spider-Man villain that has yet to be seen in the movies at the time of writing. He's become one of Spider-Man's most iconic and tragic villains, and for years people have wanted to see one of the Spider-Men face off against him. Now, we're seemingly going to be getting a Kraven solo movie starring Aaron Taylor Johnson, and I thought now would be a good time to ask, what if Kraven the Hunter was in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies? Now, before I begin this scenario, I should mention that while Sam Raimi never had an actor in mind as far as I know for Kraven, I'm going to be going with Richard Armitage, both because he looks the part and he's just a phenomenal actor with a very commanding presence and steely-eyed look. Besides, I just wish he'd been in a superhero movie longer than a few minutes, cough cough Captain America. So our story begins in Spider-Man 1, where after the montage that features Spider-Man making his proper debut in New York, we see a man named Sergei Kravinoff, aka Kraven the Hunter. Now he's an obsessive big game hunter, and we see a montage of his epic training and his ability to take out large animals with just his bare hands, goddamn. However, he's gotten bored of killing large beasts, and he yearns for a new challenge. So after learning about Spider-Man, Kraven decides that Spider-Man is the ultimate prey, and he decides to make his way to New York to hunt him down. So now Kraven serves as a minor antagonist for the rest of the movie. He basically fights Spider-Man whenever he's not fighting the Green Goblin, and he really takes it to Peter in their fights. Now he actually gets involved in the final battle between Spider-Man and Green Goblin, though Spider-Man's able to take him out temporarily. However, he wakes up long enough to see that Spider-Man's secret identity is Peter Parker, but Peter doesn't know he knows that yet. So now this leads us to Spider-Man 2, where Kraven actually attacks Peter during the movie's opening pizza delivery sequence. Spider-Man ultimately manages to escape from this fight, but he still does not deliver the pizza on time, of course. So now later on, when Peter stops being Spider-Man, Kraven isn't very happy that the hunt is seemingly over. So he breaks into Peter's apartment building, and he actually kidnaps Ursula when she steps out to see what the commotion is. But Peter still doesn't have his powers back. So instead of the house on fire sequence that we got, we instead see Peter having to try and rescue Ursula without his powers, which he actually does, but only after he takes an awful beating. Now this shows just how human Peter is now, and Kraven is almost disgusted with what Spider-Man has become. So he just lets Ursula go because it's just not fun for him to fight him anymore. So now we end Spider-Man 2 with the final swing, where we see he's going into battle with a now reinvigorated Kraven the Hunter. Now something else I should mention is that Eddie Brock is introduced in Spider-Man 2 instead of Spider-Man 3 in this version, and he adds on to Peter's troubles because he's helping J. Jonah Jameson to slander him. And I'll get into why I moved his story up in the next part. Now, in Spider-Man 3, we get a much sadder story for Peter Parker. We see that he and MJ are having arguments because of how much Peter is exerting himself as Spider-Man. He regularly returns home beaten to a pulp. Peter has this chip on his shoulder because the city has now turned on him even more thanks to slandering by Eddie Brock. And he's also now been forced to move out of his apartment due to the fact that Kraven knows his secret identity. So he now lives in an even worse and shittier apartment. Now, Peter tries to get away from it all and prove that his devotion to New York is true, but just absolutely killing himself as Spider-Man. But this means that Peter is a lot quicker to anger, and he starts taking his frustrations out on Mary Jane. And life for him just gets worse when Harry, his best friend, attacks and tries to kill him. So now instead of Peter giving Harry a convenient concussion and wiping his memory, he instead just gets injured for a while and is in a coma, because this movie just has a lot going on, and I kinda need him out of the way, I'm sorry. So now after the fight, we cut to Kraven the Hunter, and we see that he's digging a grave. And now when the digging is over, Kraven admires his handiwork, and the camera pans around him to reveal the name Peter Parker. So now later on, we see Peter and MJ are having their worst argument yet, to the point that she actually storms out of the apartment. She's trying to tell him about how she got fired from her play, but Peter just really isn't listening to her anymore. Their communication issues are worse than ever in this movie. Now, immediately after this, Peter gets a phone call from the NYPD, and he learns that Flint Marko killed Uncle Ben. Now, MJ tries to be there for Peter, but he's just not in his right mind, and he tells her he doesn't need her help. And this is, of course, when he gets the black suit. So now the following night, we see Peter go off to find the Sandman, and he rips the sewer grate off to follow him. And we see that Kraven is watching him from afar, and when he sees Peter's newfound strength, he looks even more interested in fighting him again. So now later on, Peter fights and seemingly kills the Sandman, and we then get a montage of Peter just being a douche. He steals Gwen Stacy from Eddie Brock, and then gets Eddie fired, just like he did, because he's just had it up to here with Eddie badmouthing him for 2 movies straight. So now we then see him breaking criminals' bones, flipping over cars with people still inside them, and we see Peter saving a family from a mugger in an alleyway, and the little boy of the family is actually terrified of Spider-Man now. That's how the city views him. They're terrified of him now. Now this is where we finally see Kraven strike. We get the biggest battle between these two that we've ever gotten. Kraven lures Spider-Man to the graveyard, where he finally overcomes Peter long enough to hit him with a tranquilizer dart. Peter starts hallucinating, and he sees visions of Mary Jane, who reprimands him for all the bad things he's done in the movie up to this point. She then walks out on him, leaving him to his own suffering at the hands of Kraven, who then bends down in front of Peter's face and rips his mask off. He tells him he's been waiting a long time for a truly competitive fight against Spider-Man. But now that he's had his fun, he says that he thinks he finally understands what kind of a symbol Spider-Man is, and now he wants that symbol to be his own trophy. So now Kraven then drags the limp Peter towards the grave he dug earlier, and he begins tearing off the symbiote suit. It puts up a fight of its own, but in the end, it does switch over to Kraven and bond with him. Now Peter audibly groans louder now with the suit off, because the suit was numbing his injuries, but now it's gone. So now he's still wearing the red suit underneath, just so he's not naked, but the colors are all faded. Now Kraven then simply tells Peter, "It's been fun," before kicking his body into the grave inside of a coffin, before slowly but surely burying him alive. New York has a new Spider-Man, and his name is Kraven. So we then cut ahead a little bit, and we see MJ is starting to become really worried about Peter. He's not answering his phone, and he hasn't been in his apartment. In the meantime, MJ decides to try visiting Harry at the hospital, only to find that he's not in his bed anymore. She asks one of the nurses, who says as far as she knows, he should still be in his bed. So he snuck out, obviously. So now we see Flint Marko is in fact not dead. I'm so shocked. And then we cut to the Daily Bugle, where we see that Eddie is bringing in another picture of Spider-Man being brutal. But this one puzzles JJ. He questions the validity of the photo, and Eddie is just like, "Why would I fake that?" And JJ just looks at him really seriously and says, "There's something wrong with the picture. Something wrong with Spider-Man." And Eddie's just like, "Well, you were the one who wanted Spider-Man with his hand in a cookie jar, right?" And JJ just takes a minute to respond before saying, "Of course I did," before hiring Eddie for the staff job. But after Eddie leaves, we see him walking over to the window, and he just mutters under his breath, "It can't be him." So now we see Harry in the Goblin Cave, and he tells Bernard about the flaws that were in the original suit he came up with. He says he needs a new suit, one that honors his father's legacy more prominently. Thus, he and Bernard construct the Hobgoblin suit. Now we then cut to MJ walking back to her apartment after her first shift at the nightclub, when she gets attacked by a group of muggers, only to be saved by quote-unquote Spider-Man. She witnesses him being extra brutal with the muggers. He actually beats them nearly to death, and she just cries out, "Stop, Peter, stop." But when Spider-Man looks at her, she can just tell it's not Peter, even through the mask, and she runs off. So we then cut back to Peter, who's still very much alive inside that coffin, and he's unsuccessfully trying to bust his way out. But he just doesn't have the strength, but more importantly, he doesn't have the motivation. He was an asshole, and he knows it. He seemingly killed the Sandman, he pushed away Mary Jane when she was trying to help him, and he made New York afraid of the symbol that was supposed to make them feel protected. He starts to question whether he ever deserved to be Spider-Man. We then get another scene between Peter and his Uncle Ben, like in Spider-Man 2. Peter talks about everything that he's done wrong, and how he doesn't feel like he deserves to be Spider-Man anymore. He told him that with great power comes great responsibility, but he hasn't been very responsible at all with his great power. And now Uncle Ben just tells him, even great heroes fall from time to time. Nobody expects a hero to be perfect, but what's really important is to remain steady and to do what's right because it's the right thing to do. He asks if Peter remembers the day in the car when Peter asked if he was worried he'd become some sort of criminal. Uncle Ben smiles and says he knew exactly the kind of man that Peter would become, and he offers his hand once again, and this time, Peter takes it. He then wakes up reinvigorated and manages to break out of his coffin. Spider-Man is back from the dead. So now the Hobgoblin starts attacking Kraven, and then the Sandman shows up as well. Now Peter swings up there too, and we get an epic fight between Spider-Man, Kraven, the Hobgoblin, and the Sandman. And now Peter temporarily takes out the Sandman and Kraven before turning over to Harry. He tells Harry once again that he didn't kill his father. His father killed himself. He begs for him to trust him, and he even offers his life to Harry, saying, if this is what it takes to get you to trust me, then it's more than worth it to get my friend back. Harry then finally decides to try trusting Peter. So now Harry and Peter team up, and they manage to defeat the Sandman, but Kraven proves a much more difficult challenge for them because not only is he an experienced hunter, but now he also has the power of the symbiote behind him. Now at one point, Kraven actually has Spider-Man dead to rights, but that's when Harry rushes in, and he takes the fatal blow that was meant for Peter. Peter then uses the symbiote's aversion to noise, and manages to free Kraven from the suit. He then uses a pumpkin bomb to destroy the symbiote. Peter then prepares for another round against Kraven, but instead, he just stops. And he says that the demon, meaning Spider-Man, has already been defeated. He says that this was his last hunt. Peter then instead just arrests Kraven. Now we then get the same finale that we got with Harry's emotional death scene and Sandman revealing exactly what happened with Uncle Ben that night. Then at the end of the movie, Peter and MJ start on the path to fixing their relationship for the better. So I'm sure most of you can tell I adapted the Kraven's Last Hunt storyline, although I did change quite a lot of things. Like, I already thought Spider-Man 3 had too many villains as it was, so I decided not to include Vermin. Sorry about that. And I know this was controversial. I know that Kraven normally kills himself at the end of that story, but I hope you guys can understand why I couldn't do that, because, like, Eddie kind of killed himself, but I don't know if he meant to. But, like, Kraven, he purposely kills himself. And, like, I just don't imagine Sony would want that in their movie, honestly. I just don't think they would give the green light for that. Besides that, I don't think that Sam Raimi would want to kill him off because he has not made it exactly clear officially, but I'm pretty sure that he wanted to do a movie with the Sinister Six, and it would just make sense to keep Kraven alive for that movie. Somehow, of course, forcing Kraven to change his mind about wanting to continue hunting Spider-Man, of course. But anyway, I'm not gonna lie with you guys. This was probably the scariest what-if scenario I've ever made because, look, I don't read comics too much, and I tried my best to do what I could with Kraven in the movies, and I really hope I did a good job because you guys voted so much for this, and I really don't want to let anybody down, and I'm really sorry if I have. Like, I've been scared to upload certain videos before because when you make as many videos as me, because I upload videos every single day at 7 a.m., make sure to stay tuned tomorrow, but when you're making as many videos as me, you know, you just get worried that, like, the next video you do is the one that everybody's gonna hate. So, you know, I'm very scared to upload this one. I'm not gonna lie. And I really hope you guys like it. I really did try to do a good story, and I really hope I managed to do that. But yeah, I just thought that Kraven's Last Hunt was a really good story for Spider-Man 3 because, you know, I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to give Spider-Man a character re-examination. You know, take the time while he's literally buried 6 feet under to question whether or not he's been doing the right thing as Spider-Man up to that point, which for the record, he hadn't been doing the right thing up to that point. So, you know, I just think that would have been a cool thing to do. And now I'm sure that plenty of you are going to have problems with me casting Richard Armitage, because I know that this was like before he had been in bigger projects. But honestly, I mean, he just looks so much like Kraven. I don't know if he could do a convincing Russian accent. He did a convincing German accent in Captain America. So I'm sure he could probably do a Russian accent fine. And yeah, as I said, he just really looks the part, doesn't he? So, like, I don't know. That was just my decision. You're fine to disagree with it. I'm sure that plenty of you are going to have your own casting choices. And I honestly cannot wait to hear what they are in the comments. I really can't. But anyway, guys, I really do hope that you enjoyed this scenario. If you did, make sure to let me know by giving this video a thumbs up and letting me know in the comments down below. Also in the comments down below, make sure to give me more what-if recommendations, whether that's for Spider-Man, any other Marvel characters, or anything not Marvel that you can think of. Make sure to ring that notification bell, because as I said, I upload videos every single day at 7 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. And also make sure to share this video with all of your friends and all your various social media platforms. And make sure to follow me on Instagram, Rinzler_productions. And I'll see all you guys in the next video.